What were the Crusades? If you ask your average public school history teacher, they'll say the Crusades were the time a bunch of Christians went and killed a bunch of Muslims because they were mean and bad. But if you ask the average young Christian guy on the internet, he'll say the Crusades were the glorious defense of Western civilization from destruction. So what really happened? Now this is a theology channel, not a history channel, so this video is going to be less about the details of battles and stuff, because many other channels can do that better, and more about the religious aspects of the Crusades, and also explaining what each of the Crusades was about. So basically, all the lands surrounding the Mediterranean and more used to be Christian, but when Islam started, it conquered a lot of formerly Christian lands. That sucks, but at least we can still go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Hey, we're the Seljuk Turks, and you can't go to the Holy Land. This was also a political concern, because the Christian Byzantine Empire, which used to be big, was now in danger of being completely conquered. Christianity had recently split into Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, but the leaders of both sides began thinking of how they could retake formerly Christian lands, especially the Holy Land. So there were two main questions Christian leaders of this time had to deal with. Number one, how do we justify going to war over religion? And number two, how do we inspire people to go to war over this? There have been many debates in church history about whether it's biblical to go to war in the name of Jesus. The early church was very pacifist and did not fight back when persecuted by the Roman Empire, partly because when Peter cut off the ear of the soldier that was arresting Jesus, Jesus told him not to do that and healed the soldier's ear. But when the Roman Empire became Christian, for the first time ever you had Christian Roman soldiers, and they had to wonder if they were sinning by engaging in war and violence. But people remembered that Jesus didn't seem to have a problem with the Roman centurion being a soldier. In fact, Jesus said that he had greater faith than anyone in Israel. So Augustine thought of just war theory, since Romans 13 says the government can use violence to restrain evil, which implies that governments can go to war in self-defense. But that still only applies to the secular world or the kingdoms of men, not to the religious world or the kingdom of God. This still doesn't justify a holy war. But if you have one country that happens to be Muslim invading another country that happens to be Christian, the Christian country is allowed to go to war in self-defense as long as the war is not about Christianity per se. Okay, Emperor, I checked my Bible and it says we can go to war as long as the war is not about spreading Christianity. Right, okay, got it. Not a war about Christianity. Completely secular war, don't you worry. Hey, yo, Pope, want to go to war to retake the Holy Land? Heck yeah. So how's the Pope going to inspire people to fight a war so far from home? Two ways, relics and indulgences. In Catholicism, relics are objects connected to holy people or events that can give you blessings. Even though Europe already had 3 skulls of John the Baptist floating around, and all 18 of the 12 apostles were buried in Spain, the most relics were in the Holy Land. Since that's where the Bible happened, it obviously had the best relics, including, I don't know, the cross Jesus died on? Who wants to go on a pilgrimage to see these relics? We do! Too bad, the Holy Land is controlled by people who will attack you. If you want to see these relics, you gotta retake it. A big factor was also indulgences, because Catholics believe in purgatory, a place of punishment on the way to heaven after death. It can be hard for modern people to understand how scared people were of purgatory back then, because modern Catholicism tends to sound like, yeah man, you're not perfect, we all need a little fixing up before going to heaven, but just trust God and everything will be okay. Purgatory might even be instantaneous, who knows? Whereas in medieval Catholicism it was more like, you did what? You're looking at 1,000 years of agonizing pain in purgatory at this point. Okay, but what if I become a nun, start 10 hospitals, 5 orphanages, and donate everything I own to the poor? 995 years of purgatory. So you can understand why, when the Pope promised no time in purgatory for those who fought in the Crusades, it was very exciting to a population that lived their entire lives in fear of purgatory. This is what Pope Urban II said at the Council of Clermont, which kicked off the First Crusade. Religious fervor spread like wildfire throughout Christian Europe in what was known as the People's Crusade, with priests like Peter the Hermit rallying up ordinary people to go fight, and some religious minorities were massacred along the way. The people assembled in Anatolia, and were immediately annihilated by the Seljuk army. Okay, let's try that again. This time let's only have trained nobility fight. Luckily for the Crusaders, the Seljuks were in a bit of a civil war themselves, so it wasn't that hard for the Crusaders to conquer Anatolia. After that, it was onward to the Holy Land. There were 2 cities the Christians cared about in particular. Antioch was where Christians were first called Christian, and Jerusalem was where Jesus died and rose again. Both of these cities had their own patriarchs from back when they had been Christian. The Crusaders did a siege of Antioch, which fell in 1098, and a siege of Jerusalem, which fell in 1099, and there they massacred much of the city's population. While the Crusades did start as a defensive war, and they were just a response to centuries of violent Islamic conquest, we can't gloss over the atrocities that were committed. Either way, the First Crusade was a major victory, and it resulted in establishing 4 Christian Crusader states in the Holy Land. Yay, we got back the Holy Land! I guess the Crusades are over! Not so fast. You see, after the First Crusade ended, the soldiers began returning home, leaving the Crusader states under-defended, outnumbered, and surrounded by Muslim lands that wanted to retake them. The Muslims were divided at first, but the Crusade helped unify them against the Christians. We need help! Luckily, these Italian city-states are happy to help, because trade with these new Crusader states means money for them. You may think of those places as fancy tourist attraction cities, but they only got that way due to the money they got from this. At this point, they're still full of brave warriors, and they do defend the Crusader states for a while. Then the Knights Templar are founded in Jerusalem to protect pilgrims to the Holy Land, because that was kind of the original point of the Crusades in the first place. They're called that because they were founded in the temple. So things are going pretty well right now. Hi, can I have Antioch? It used to be mine, said the Byzantine Empire. Heck no, we conquered it fair and square. Okay, but the whole purpose of the war was you defending me. No, the war is because you heretics got your butts kicked, and we had to step in and save the day. You guys are the heretics, you dirty pope-worshipping, filioque-affirming Latin pieces of— Surprise! While the Christians were arguing amongst themselves, the Muslims reconquered Edessa. You know what this means, right? We need another crusade. The Second Crusade had one goal: retake Edessa. Once again, there was a massive campaign to recruit soldiers in Europe, led by the famous preacher and theologian Bernard of Clairvaux. Centuries later, he'd be greatly respected by Protestants and Catholics because he taught salvation by faith alone, but also that Mary has an important role in salvation. The Crusaders once again show up with fiery passion, but when they get there, they turn on their only Muslim ally, Damascus, and they don't retake Edessa. So the Second Crusade was a massive failure, and all it did was unify all the Muslims in the region under the famous Saladin. But at least these Crusader states are still here, and life is actually really good there, better than the surrounding areas, so Muslims begin migrating to these Christian countries to have a better life. Sound familiar? This really pisses off the Muslim leaders, so Saladin sends his massive armies to conquer the Crusader states, but the Crusader states are defended by King Baldwin IV. You might recognize him from every trad guy's profile picture, but he's not famous for nothing. He was just a teenager, and he suffered from leprosy, but his small, outnumbered armies defeated Saladin again and again and again. It wasn't until Baldwin died that Saladin was able to finally retake Jerusalem, as well as almost everything else the Crusaders had conquered. This was a complete disaster for the Christians. Now they were almost back to square one. You know what this means, right? It's time for another crusade. This one's called the King's Crusade because it was led by the kings of England, France, and Germany. The main mission? Retake Jerusalem. So the kings set out for Jerusalem. This one died before they got there, but Richard arrived and defeated Saladin's armies in battle. He conquered a nice strip of land along the coast, but Saladin still owned Jerusalem. Hey man, if you let Christian pilgrims travel safely to Jerusalem, I won't attack it. Deal? Deal. Both Richard and Saladin were known for their honor and chivalry, so I guess the crusade was kind of a success, but a lot of Christians still wanted Jerusalem back. At this point, Christians are getting tired of crusading for the same land again and again with diminishing returns, and Catholics are starting to blame the Orthodox Byzantine Empire for the loss of Jerusalem. Well, said Pope Innocent III, nothing we can do except try again, I guess. Crusade! Once again, they need help from Venice, who supplies the soldiers, but Venice has major trade rivals with the Byzantine Empire. Change of plans, guys. Instead of Jerusalem, you guys are going to attack Constantinople. The sacking of Constantinople was brutal and violent, and it was an infamous example of Christians turning on each other. At first, people had hoped the Crusades might mend the schism between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but this put the nail in the coffin of their relationship forever. Alright, I guess it's time for another crusade. Let's try a different strategy this time. What if we conquer Egypt first, get their resources, and then attack Jerusalem from there? So the Crusaders invade Egypt, and they fail and die. The German king Frederick II is king of one of the Crusader states, so the Pope tells him to retake Jerusalem, and when he doesn't really feel like it, the Pope excommunicates him. But then he does it, just like that. What decades of Christian soldiers couldn't do, Frederick did mostly by diplomacy with the other local kings. But then when Frederick leaves, Jerusalem quickly falls back into Muslim hands. "I'll save the day," says King Louis IX of France. He thinks he can be another Frederick. His plan is just like the Fifth Crusade, to first invade Egypt and then invade Jerusalem. And just like the Fifth Crusade, that fails. "Okay," he says, "let me try again. What if I first invade Tunisia so I can invade Egypt so I can invade Jerusalem?" So he tries that, but then his soldiers all die of plague and don't even make it to Egypt. After that, the Catholic Church basically gives up on the Crusades, so it doesn't take the Muslims long to retake all the Crusader states, ending Christian presence in the Middle East for centuries. So you might be wondering, what was the point? Was it even worth it? Well, the Crusades didn't succeed at their original goal of capturing Jerusalem, but when they started, Iberia had been mostly conquered by Muslims with just a tiny Christian holdout in the north. But, as other countries were sending Crusaders to the Holy Land, many of them stopped in Iberia along the way for a side quest called the Reconquista. It took centuries, but gradually Christians retook the entire peninsula, and it was a smashing success. They actually retook Spain. They retook the Spain Line Church. This shows that a tiny minority of faithful Christians can take back something big if they're patient and don't give up. Very inspiring. Spain and Portugal would later be inspired by the Crusades to spread Christianity all throughout the world. Also, military orders like the Teutonic Knights, founded during and by the Crusades, successfully conquered Livonia, which is still Christian to this day. The money the Italian city-states got from the Crusades would eventually help them kickstart the Renaissance, which would shape all of world history. So were the Crusades good or bad? Like everything in history, it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, they were funded by a lot of corrupt means like indulgences, they did commit atrocities, Christians turned on each other, and they didn't even achieve their original goal. But they did probably defend Europe from Islamic conquest, they retook some lands like Spain, and over the course of 200 years, they killed fewer people than the Vietnam War did. Obviously, war is always bad, but some war is better and less bloody than others. But, as we know, Christianity's goals won't be fully achieved until Jesus comes back.